Hi and welcome to this video where I'm going to be replacing the check valve on this air compressor. So I've had some issues with it and I have done a couple of videos on this before where I replace the start capacitor and check the run capacitor and things like that. Now it normally fills up fine and most of the time it runs fine, but occasionally it still trips the breaker once it's partially empty and then it starts to try to refill. Now my attention was mostly on the unloader valve, which is on the end of this tube, but I keep checking that and it seems to be working fine, and when the compressor finishes filling up, the unloader valve does the hiss of air which it's supposed to, so I'm thinking that probably is okay. So I think what I'm going to do is just rule out this check valve once and for all. So what I've done is I was looking on eBay hoping to get a cheaper one, but this tank actually has a 3/4 inch fitting. I'll show you that there. 3/4 inch fitting for the tank and then 1/2 inch for the compressor, the piston, and then 1/8 for the unloader valve. So this one's made in Italy as well. So this was about £20 delivered. So what I'm going to do is replace that with this, and then we'll have a quick look inside here and see what this check valve is all about. So hopefully you'll enjoy this video and many thanks for watching.
So the first thing to do is disconnect all the air lines and depressurize the tank. So this is my clean air supply connector. I'll just disconnect that. I also have one which drips oil into the airline for air tools. So this one's for my tyre inflator and stuff like that. Best disconnect our power, which is 16 amp in this case. And then finally this one, which is, like I say, for the air tools, where it has an oil dripper that just constantly feeds oil into the airline. Right then, so we're try and wiggle this over, and then what we'll have to do is just depressurize the tank. So there shouldn't be too much water in, because I do normally drain this daily, which is what you're supposed to do. So how much is in there? There is still quite a little bit of water there. Right, so we'll let that out. And then this is the big one for the grit blasting cabinet. That looks like it's gone pretty cold there. Saw a bit of a cloud. Yeah, that looks pretty frozen now. Right then, so now to remove the old check valve and show the spring and the pastel. Okay then, so starting with a 24mm spanner. You're probably better using the ring end on this, so you don't sort of nail the head of this. So inside here is the spring and the little plastic pastel that makes the non-return valve. So it sort of keeps the air in the tank and stops that air going back up to the piston, where it would obviously play havoc with the piston trying to push air back into it. So this sort of takes the load off the piston, so as the piston pushes the air into the tank, it stays in the tank and keeps that pressure there. So then it's a 14mm spanner now to undo the little pipe that goes to the unloader valve, and then back onto a 24mm to remove the pipe from the actual compressor itself, or from the piston. And then it's a 26mm spanner to undo the housing itself. Now I have had this off before, and as you can see I've used a silicone based sealant there that actually has worked before. So I'm not sure why in this video I decided to try and use a different type of sealant, which didn't work, as you'll see later on. Okay, then I need to clean that up, and now to prep the new non-return valve, or NRV, and refit back onto the tank. Okay then, so what I have got to do is remove the right angle adapter here, because that doesn't come with the new valve. So what I noticed was the sealant I had previously used on this many years ago, probably back in 2010, because it was leaking when I actually bought this compressor. I think this was probably Loctite 542 or equivalent, because it's sort of set hard, and it did do a cracking job of sealing that. So I'm not sure why I then decided to try gasket sealant. Not one of my brightest ideas. At least I've now learned that gasket sealant stays like a soft rubber and doesn't actually really go hard. So unfortunately I'm going to have to take all this back off again once I find out that it leaks tomorrow morning. So we've popped that on there. Yeah, like I said, I'd advise Loctite 542. So the problem with me is I tend not to buy things like that, because if I don't get to use them much, they always seem to go out of date and then you have to throw it away. So I tend to try and use whatever I've got available in the garage at the time, which isn't always the best logic there. So anyway, so I've wound this on there. I think it was actually a full 360 degrees short as well, because it could have been rotated once more, which would have made it a little bit tighter. Though I think the gasket maker wasn't really going to fill the void in there on the thread, and it certainly wasn't going to handle the pressure of 10 bar. But anyway, I'll show it since I've recorded it, because it is worth noting that sometimes it's better to use the proper sealant and try not to cut corners. And then half the garage decides to fall down. Right then, so how the one-way check valve works. So I'll pop this in a vise, and hopefully using a pencil I'll be able to demonstrate how this actually works. So the air will come in from the top from the piston, push down on the black pastel. The air would then come towards the camera and into the tank, and that valve should stop the air going back up towards the piston. And the unloader valve port is connected directly with the pipe from the actual piston of the compressor. So those two are joined together. So that's how the bleed off works. So I'll open this up again just so we can get a closer look. Like I said, I have actually tried to tinker with this, which is why I think it probably doesn't work at all now properly. But I did try to finely sand it, because it had sort of distorted under heat, I think. So I tried to straighten it up a bit. So not sure whether trying to mend it caused more issues or not. But there we are. That's the spring and pastel. Right, so next day after leaving things to set, time to use some Fernox LS-X instead. So yes, it's leaking quite nicely. So that's definitely, you can see where the air's pushed up on the sealant there and bubbled it out. Right then, so we'll have this back off now, and we'll have to clean it all back up, get it all clean again, and try something that we knew actually worked in the first place, which was the Fernox LS-X. So this does work. Like I said, I still think Loctite 542 would be a more durable sealant, but this one is like a high quality silicon, I think. So this part actually on my new valve was actually slightly dented from the post. So I did have to sort of try and tidy the thread up because it had taken a bit of a ding. So a bit disappointed with that I was. Right, so let's get this back on the tank now. And hopefully this is going to actually solve the problem of the air compressor occasionally tripping the breaker. So I'm putting quite a bit on there because it's almost quite a loose fit on this. It does seem to be quite a bit of space down the bottom. So I'm trying to put quite a bit on the edge there. So as I tighten this up, it hopefully leaves a bit of a seal down the base of this screw thread. Right, so I'm going to make sure I actually turn it up, tighten this properly. So it sort of goes that far. So I've got to back it back off and then bring it in line. I mean, I suppose you could try PTFE tape. I think I did try that originally and didn't have much luck with that. Because like I say, the gaps on this seem to be quite large. Which is why I tend to prefer like a sealant that would actually give some sort of gap filling properties. So we just pop our unloader tube back on now. Snug that up with a 14mm, and we'll leave things overnight again and see what happens in the morning. Right, so after leaving this to set for 12 hours, all has been okay with no leaks, and the compressor appears to be starting okay so far, but it's still early days. So it might be just worth mentioning what the check valve and the unloader valve does. So the check valve, or NRV, is there to allow the air from the compressor's piston into the air tank and keeping it there. If it were to flow back to the piston, it would stop the air compressor from starting, as the piston would be under pressure from inside the air tank. The unloader valve, which is connected to the check valve, is there to release the air pressure above the piston when the compressor stops. Again, if there was residue air pressure above the piston, it would create too much loading on the piston, and thus the motor, which would cause the circuit breaker to trip, as the motor would draw too many amps trying to turn the compressor over. So here's some reference photographs. So here is my order for that non-return valve, just so you can see what it was. And here's the pastel that appears to be quite lopsided. So whether that affected it. So here's the Fernox LS-X, which does work. So here's some close-ups of the valve. Again, there's the pastel part. So I'm just including some diameters here, so you can see, just in case you've got this same valve on your air compressor and you need to change it. So hopefully this helps you identify things if you need to order one. So you've been watching replacing the check valve or non-return valve on an air compressor. Thank you for watching, and I hope this video helps you service and maintain your air compressor. This video was filmed and edited by me, Mark Savage, in February 2022, and I can be found on Instagram and Facebook as Coats and Gators.